Onorevoli ospiti, signore e signori, stimati colleghi, studenti e miei amici, è un onore per me di partecipare in questo importante simposio. Ringrazio i nostri ospiti di SACI, a co-sponsor, NYU Florence, che ha un'esibizione d'arte contemporanea regarding women in action alla loro Villa La Pietra. Ringraziamenti speciali alla mia amica Dr. Mary Beckinsale, di storica d'arte e presidente emerito di SACI, per la sua dedizione, uguaglianza delle donne nel cammino della vita. Grazie, Mary. Molto grazie. Allora, continuiamo in English. Resetting the Table, a symposium on feminist art and herstory. My paper, Feminist Art and Social Action. I am neither an art historian by trade or by training. I deny the moniker collector, which necessitates an obsession to acquire objects, along with a knowledge akin to a curator. I am a public historian by degree, a performance artist by nature, a visionary by blessing and instinct, and I proudly and happily own the descriptor, social art activist, born and bred as a result of my father and mother's brilliance and largesse. As I work in the world, I add to that descriptor and self-describe as a social activist of means. Philanthropist does not accurately describe me, nor is it in my vocabulary. I bring this in as a preface by way of the subject because I'm grateful, really grateful and happy to be invited as a speaker in Resetting the Table, a symposium on feminist art and herstory. Feminism has been and always will be about parity for women and equality for all people, pure and simple. Until such time as we live in a world of equality, justice, and equity for all, feminism in all its iterations must be held on high as its beacon. We seek parity, equal pay, equal wall space, equal everything, anything, and all for all. Feminism is that straightforward. In the world in which I orbit, any question of why feminist art is answered at the Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum. If one tours the Dinner Party by Judy Chicago, you see the exhibitions in the Feminist and Herstory galleries that surround it, attend programs in our forum, lecture, panel discussion, symposia, questions of why feminist art are answered. All exist to teach history and herstory, to tell the stories and elucidate experience of women artists, feminists, women of color, queer art. Most all have battled with obstacles of one sort or another to live, to make art, to be recognized, and all fear erasure. I see that there are two truths that are overlooked. One is that from childhood, we are taught, all of us are taught, to see things as men see them, through a male lens. Because we live in a patriarchal world, the result is we value and judge all we see and experience from a male mindset, the dominant dialogue. Females are often unaware that our opinions and worldviews are already unconsciously biased. Our assessments are preordained by virtue of the male cultural default. This art is not as good as that. Inequity and inequality is a natural order. Women are not equal to men, hence deserve less than or must do more than. All of that is embedded in our mindset, in our DNA. Our Western educational system divides gender into power, disempowered polarities. So our systems of education must be reviewed and restructured in order to support equity in society. The second truth is a wonderful lesson from the great abolitionist Harriet Tubman, who ran the Underground Railroad during the American Civil War and risked her life over and over to bring slaves from the South to the North and to Canada. Gloria Steinem loves to point out that this particular Tubman anecdote, quote, when Harriet was heralded for the 1,000 slaves she helped free, she said, "I could have freed another 1,000 if they had known they were slaves." Our actions are subjected to scrutiny, subjugated, and reformed to a patriarchal hierarchy model. This is a cultural construct, not a natural order, and so insidious that we fail to recognize it or its effects. Indigenous and Aboriginal cultures do not have words for male and female. People are people. Matriarchal lineage is abundant, jobs assigned by task and talent, and decisions by consensus, working in circle as opposed to linear, to create cooperation. Nurturers, birthers, multitaskers recognize complexity, and rather than muddle and mire, have an ability to simplify with inclusion, balance, expectations, demands, and opportunities. There's so much we have to learn about women's herstory, and much we have to learn about our sheroes. We don't even share a vocabulary that credits us. There is a patron of the arts, but with its complement, we must have a matron of the arts to identify the person of the action, so long as we are in a binary state. We must begin to look for and to at what we don't see. Right now, the power of half of the human race is muted. For the most part, one could easily think that most everything has been and is achieved by men, but in fact, that is only half true and only half the story. It is from this point of view that feminist art came into being, as its content evolved from the fight against omission as well as submission to the use of the female body as a tool to imbue the art itself and to show the feelings of the marginalized and being viewed as such, and ultimately, at the present, to present their world, their view. Contemporary works by Catherine Opie, Marilyn Minter, Zanelli Maholi, Landau, Suzuki, and dozens more are identifying and exemplifying my points above. In the early 1970s, frustrated and angered by the criticism and chides of their male art teachers, color shapes, and content choices, Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro left that male bastion and set out on their own. This was during the height of the women's movement on the East Coast. Judy told me that her participation in and contribution to the women's movement was to create an art form to address women's issues and history, and was true to her own aesthetic and content. Woman House, which was open from January 30th until February 28th, 1972, was a feminist art installation and performance space organized by Judy and Miriam with the students and local artists of their co-founded CalArts Feminist Arts program. It was the first of its kind. Feminist art was often running with them. It has identified, recognized, and portrayed struggle. It is by definition about a form and the forum for change. Whether subtle or in your face, women artists have provided us with a mirror of moments in time and at its best, a map for the future. The personal is political. was the rallying cry of underscoring connections between personal experience and of women institutional structures opposed to equality. It was a cry of revolt against political, social, educational, and business decisions made by men that in effect were and are attacks against female lives and their bodies. As the movement grew among the female artists, so did the effect of their work. The world-famous critic Lucy Lepard and the outstanding art historian Linda Nochlin began to write about and teach feminist art and theory, its meaning, and its import. Radicals they were, those two, in their time. In many instances, thanks to Lepard and Nochlin, feminist art now has a capital F and a capital A, like classical, impressionism, cubism, modern, German expressionism, abstract, performance, contemporary, becoming a genre of art, and in the lineup of art history, capital A, capital H. Feminist art continues to be political and social and holds on high the values of core equity, inclusion, and recognition, and against suppression, oppression, racism, and bigotry. Art, as we all know, is powerful, and feminist art is a powerful tool for change. To have a wing, a physical space for art, exhibitions, and programming dedicated to that end is what I envisioned and why I worked with the Brooklyn Museum to create the Sackler Center for Feminist Art. We began the process of its creation in a signed agreement in 2001. From 1976 until 1979, Judy worked and led a team of over 400 women to create the dinner party. This monumental work recognizes 1,038 women from prehistory to the present who worked in every discipline, from philosophy to medicine, from politics to music and art. Judy chose the 39 women to be honored with a seat at the table and has written and spoken at length about the punishment, disrespect, and erasure of women in history over the millennium. After its opening in 1980 at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, in the fall of 1979, it immediately traveled, the dinner party, to 4 continents and was seen by more than 1 million women. Testimonials of that time tell us that the experience of women being in the presence of the dinner party changed their lives. The dinner party has become an emblem of our struggle as women to participate and be included in the complete story of humankind. As Judy's cry to halt the erasure of women from art, from history, from education, she also changed art, artists and their art. With the dinner party, Judy Chicago opened up the acceptance of personal content before which art had seldom known, in a way that art had seldom known. Not only has she empowered women artists, but she inspired and, in effect, gave permission to male artists to embrace uncharted territories. Without Chicago, there would be no Mapplethorpe. Without the dinner party, contemporary art would be a very different animal. For Judy, the permanent housing of the dinner party in the Sackler Center was an end of her fear that the dinner party would be erased, and so would the opportunity for recognition for women in the future, and she felt secure. For me, the dinner party's permanent home became 2 things: a launching pad for new kinds of exhibitions and the opportunity for socially and politically relevant programming. The Sackler Center has created or hosted 18 major and critically acclaimed exhibitions in its Feminist Gallery. I've decided not today to not do a PowerPoint because the purpose of my remarks has to do with the social action component, and the names of the artists and the titles of their exhibition are my focus. So I'm going to list them for you now, and see if it sounds different to you than other lists or other exhibition periods that you've heard. Global Feminisms Remix. Gada Amir, Love Has No End. Burning Down the House, Building a Feminist Art Collection. Reflections in the Electric Mirror, New Feminist Video. Kiki Smith, Sojourn. Seductive Subversions, Women Pop Artists, 1958 to 1968. Lorna Simpson, Gathered. Eva Hesse, Spectres. Rachel Kneebone, Regarding Rodin. Materializing 6 Years, Lucy R. Lepard and the Emergence of Conceptual Art, September 14, 2012, February 17, 2013. Worked by Hand, Hidden Labor and Historical Quilts. Wengechi Mutu, A Fantastic Journey, Chicago in LA, Judy Chicago's early work. Judith Scott, Bound and Unbound, Agitprop, Beverly Buchanan, Ruins and Rituals. We Wanted a Revolution, Black Radical Women, 1965 to 1985. There's nowhere else, anywhere, that you would hear a list of exhibitions like this. And we're very proud of that at the Sackler Center, as is the Brooklyn Museum. We also have a Herstory Gallery, and we've had Pharaohs, Queens, and Goddesses, Votes for Women, The Fertile Goddess, Patricia Cronin, Harriet Hosmer, Lost and Found, Healing the Wounds of War, the Brooklyn Sanitary Fair of 1864, Sam Teller Wood, Ghosts, Matthew Buckingham, The Spirit and the Letter, Newspaper Fiction, The New Journalism of Dwan Barnes, Kati Kolwitz, Prints from the War and Death Portfolios, Twice Militant, Lorraine Hansberry, Letters to the Latter, Judy Chicago's Feminist Pedagogy and Alternative Spaces, Chitra Ganesh, Eyes of Time, Women of York, Shared Dining. Other exhibitions have included Yoko Ono's Wish Tree and Between the Door and the Street by Suzanne Lacey. The Sackler Center has created and hosted more than 200 programs, all women-centric in our forum, our lecture space, and in the Cantor Auditorium. A sprinkling of some of the stellar programs we've had are Funding a Revolution, Sex Trafficking and the New Abolitionists, The Art of Activism, Women Civil Rights Leaders Who Tell Their Stories, Gender and Genocide, Aspects of Sexual Violence Against Women During the Holocaust, Women Shaping Our World, Gender, Architecture, Space, Eva Hesse, Carrying That Weight, Emma Solkowitz and Roberta Smith. And since 2014, we have addressed the horrors of mass incarceration in the United States and have presented 16 programs under our title, States of Denial, the Illegal Incarceration of Women, Children, and People of Color. All of them, by the way, are available online. If you go on to EAS CFA, that will take you to the Sackler Center website, and you'll be able to see exhibition schedules and videos. So this gives you a picture and the point of a Center for Feminist Art as a place to learn, to discover, to uncover, and address women's issues of the time. We've expanded the gallery model into a living center, interactive and educational. Within 2 months of the signing of the agreement for the Sackler Center, there was a change within the Brooklyn Museum. Curators returned to their storage and found the works by women that were left behind and took them out. 2 months after the opening of the Sackler Center, it was reported that galleries worldwide went into their storage facilities and brought out women's art up for sale. Within 2 years of our opening, every museum in New York increased their numbers of solo women shows, percentages of women in group shows, and the acknowledgement of their own permanent collection disparities. But it was after 2 years that the best thing happened to the Sackler Center, and Catherine Morris came to work as our curator. Catherine has understood the Sackler Center from our first meeting and has shaped, expanded the dialogue, changed the canon, and given the Sackler Center I see your face, Catherine. You're all going to have the pleasure of hearing her. Given the Sackler Center, the intellectual and scholarly backbone for which I am, and we all are, forever grateful. She is brilliant, she is wise, she's enthusiastic, and Catherine loves what she does, and we love what she does for us. So now, 10 years on, we have come to infiltrate, as I like to say, with and without a twinkle in my eye, to define the entirety of the Brooklyn Museum. The Brooklyn Museum has taken our lead to address the horrors of bigotry and hate, and holds on high the values of a civil society. An example is the museum's current exhibition, organized with the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama, called The Legacy of Lynching: Confronting Racial Terror in America. As a result of the success of the Sackler Center, the Brooklyn now creates and boasts civic, socially radical exhibitions and public programs with Brooklyn Talks and with its artistically rigorous programming. The success identifies the public's hunger for women's artwork, exhibitions of social import, as well as aesthetic power, and to hear programs about major issues and current events. There is no other place that they are available, and certainly not in an encyclopedic museum of our stature. People thirst for truth and for change. Feminism and feminist art provides this for them. There may be some need to understand the why and wherefore of feminist art, but more vociferously is the demand for the content that this art addresses, without shame and with dignity due. And so feminist art provides to the public a worldview different from that of our male artist counterparts. And who is the public? They say, well, if you build it, and I say they won't necessarily come. But in this case, they do, they did, they have. Singly, in couples, from groups diverse as the city itself, mother-daughter pilgrimages, Brooklyn elementary public schools, Girl Scout troops, Norway's Queen Sonja. University and high school art history classes, women's groups, and a host of other institutions arrived. And they are transformed in their wake, in our wake. Many of us desire and speak for a world in a new order. Herstory alongside history, sheroes and heroes, matrons and patrons. But above all, I speak today about a retraining of the ways in which we have been taught to view art, to be sensitive to how and the why of how we view the universe we call life. Art and architecture are the lasting evidences of a civilization. How do I pair the millennia of ancient antiquity or the centuries of art created here in Florence, for example, to a mere 10th anniversary of Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art, which sounds so meager? I do so because for what women artists over the century, millennia, have experienced must change. The Sackler Center's existence has moved the needle, shifted the authoritarian male gaze to a bilateral landscape. Our last exhibition, We Wanted a Revolution, Black Radical Artists, 1965 to 1985, was the penultimate exhibition for us to have on our 10th anniversary. Black women artists, their work, organizing, and pro-action from 65 to 85 was little known outside that circle and never mentioned in art history books. It is the exhibit of which I am most proud, in part because it is the example of the power of feminist art and the Sackler Center to alter art history and to bring together unknown groups of women and artists too long marginalized, and of course, because it was about revolution. Revolution beside evolution is the power pack combination that advances all people of all races in all hemispheres. And indeed, we know the necessity for an eco-revolution so that human beings may survive. The challenges that we face are dire. Polarization is a disaster. Cooperation is essential, as is the need for singular spaces where women's and feminist art is in the spotlight because it illuminates injustices and demands change. And at this very moment, where we are hearing and learning about gender-free and gender-neutral dialogues and environments, we have to see that they are shedding, those dialogues are shedding a new light on the meaning of feminism, of women, on females. Raising new questions at the time of this discourse, we may be rendered slightly quaint, even outdated, talking about female and feminism, when polarities are questioned as constructs. This is the new expansion. It's a new landscape in an ever-changing world. We have much before us to engage our thinking and to engage your artistic output. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak openly with this audience, whose art will feed our souls and guide our actions to heal the world. I'd like very much to open up the floor because we have time. We have a lot of time for questions. And I'd like very much not only to hear questions, but hear some opinions, as long as they're sound bites and not poetry or novels, from the audience. So I'd like to know if somebody would like to say something, to speak forward, to pose a question. And I will patiently wait and see if there is somebody who would like to be the first to step up. Yes, please.
In 1974, as a very young person, and coming from a very working class environment, I came.
Can you use the microphone, please, so because we have people who are here.
To Florence on a school trip. And since then, I've done lots and lots of things, and including found feminism, and worked very long and hard at the university and such. And I came back to Florence on this trip because I'm writing a book about my family's experience because of the wars. And I am completely amazed, because I kept a journal when I was here in '74, and I'm completely amazed at the things that being here is bringing forth for me. And finding this symposium has been just, so I'm really happy to be here with you all. Thank you.
We're very happy that you are here, and I look forward to reading your book. You'll have to let the school know when it's available. Okay. And thank you for that remark. I appreciate it. I just love this. This is one of my favorite parts of delivering a paper. Everybody hates silence, and I love it.
Do you have a vision of where you're going in forward from this point?
Do I have a vision of where I'm going forward from this point? Yes, I have a vision. My son calls it, well, he says to me, we're franchising. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on both sides of our pond, of our ocean. And so I'm hoping that there will be Sackler Centers for Feminist Art available in the future in other countries that will be nearer to those of you who live in Florence and available for other cultures here that are really yearning for them. So thank you for asking that question. And we know we need it. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the dinner party and how you envisioned it coming to the Brooklyn Museum and how the idea for the Sackler Center was born?
The idea for the Sackler Center was born because when I realized that if the space the dinner party was in was as magnificent a space as the dinner party, that it would be a transformational experience for people. Because I knew as it was that the dinner party did transform people, because you hear those testimonies from the women who saw it very early on. But I was really aware that if we found a permanent space for it, and that space was built in such a way, it would be a sacred experience for people and very transformational, both spiritually, intellectually, historically. For me, it was an opportunity, as I said when I was in my paper, as a public historian, to really dive in not only into the history and the herstory that women have, because every discipline is covered in the dinner party with 1,038 women, and many of the women were died, punished, and killed as a result of their work. But what I really felt as a public historian was that if we go back and look at our herstory, we are able then to recalibrate our actions, to recognize our thinking, and to change the future by learning from the past. That if history and herstory have any point, in addition to filling our souls with information that's really important, it also gives us and informs us in a way that provides the meat for the way in which we move through our lives, what it is that we produce, and how we do it. So that was my vision for it. That was my hope for it. I hadn't expected that it would happen successfully so fast. I thought it would take a few years, you know, and within months, life started changing, not only, as I said, within the museum, but outside of the museum walls. Many of you may have seen Elle when it was at the Pompidou. There was WAC, which was going on actually almost simultaneously, that Connie Butler had curated. And so there was a lot of activity at that time, and so there have been changes, but the disparity is still horrific. Women have a very hard time, in part because of the way the art market has been structured, which is on a patriarchal structure of, you know, of sale and of profit. And Jules Madoff and I talk often about how the art market is deadly to creativity, that young artists really need to think about what they want to express and to express it, and not worry about whether or not they're going to make money or how they're going to sell their art. And part of what the art market has done in creating using really, I mean, art as a stock, it's a stock market, it's an art market, where people rest their money. For those of you who are now creating the new art and are in art school and are artists currently, if you think of that instead of what's inside and what you want to have that's inside going out, it's really, that's really problematic. And to that extent, the Sackler Center hasn't really addressed that. I address it a lot when I speak, and when I speak also at the museum, I talk about that a lot. But we've never done we've done some programming on the art market, but not adequately. And women, I don't know how many of you were here 2 years ago, and I did a talk, I lectured on the art market. And that actually you can get online. It's on YouTube if you go into SACI, Elizabeth Sackler art. I can't remember right now what the name of the paper was, but you'll find it. It's there. And I talked at that time about what was going on that day in the art market, because it turned out that week that I was here and those days, there were art sales going on at Christie's and Sotheby's in New York. And women were receiving, you know, I mean, the sales of women, if a woman's painting, even a Louise Bourgeois, sells for $7 million, that's considered really high. And a Francis Bacon, I think, went for 135 million, something like that. I mean, the disparities are enormous. But, you know, if it's not about money, does that disparity matter? Well, it matters insofar as it trickles down to exhibitions and space and then galleries and your audience. But I go back to what I said very early in this paper, which is that we have been trained to see art and value art and have judgments about art based on the male gaze, on what we have been taught. And it is so unconscious, it's very hard to realize that. And how you know, it's insidious, and it informs everything we think about what we're looking at. It was interesting, you know, when Linda wrote in 1974, "Why have there been no great women artists?" I know Linda very well. She's getting on now, but she and I have talked about that particular article. Sometimes it's referenced as a statement, and as she always points out, it wasn't a statement. It ended with a question mark. Why have there been no great women artists? And part of what her purpose was in writing this paper was to say that there have been no great women artists because women didn't have an opportunity to paint. Women weren't allowed to paint early on. Women had to sneak painting. Women had to hope that they were maybe children of a painter. You know, Gentileschi. I mean, we have so many stories. There's so many stories of how women were not allowed to take life drawing classes. That was absolutely not permitted on either side of the ocean, in the States as well as here. And so part of what her thesis was is that, well, women didn't have the opportunity. And I said to her, I said, well, that's true. We know that's true. I mean, that's fact. But who says what's great? What makes anybody say that this art is greater, better than that art? Whose eyes are looking and making those determinations? And on one hand, one can go back and say, well, it's the critics. You know, in our contemporary world, it's the critics. Having not lived 200 years ago, I don't know, you know, how the word got spread. But it's the same problem as long as we have been living under patriarchy, is that the determination of the laws, of the rules, and of the judgments of value are not equally emerging from women's eyes. If you go back, of course, to the Greeks and you go back to Knossos, and you see all of the beautiful, beautiful paintings of the dolphins, and you know, on the walls, it was a matriarchal culture. And the art that came out of those cultures, of the Cycladic cultures, were very different than the art that was coming out afterwards, post-Homer, post, you know, the Greek and Roman takeover. I mean, so if you go back and take a look at that, I think you will be, it's wonderful to see what art women were producing. It was fecundity, it was about birth, it was about creativity, and power, but it's very different. And that's an example, really, that can be held up high as a beacon of saying, no, there once was a world where women were in power, and this is what they created, and this is what was beautiful then. So I think we have to start to think about the very, very core, you know, that very first teaching that we get about how we view the world, and it's not just art. I think it permeates everything. So far, the only questions that have come from Mary and Catherine. So I'm going to wait. Yes, yay. Oh, go. Hello.
I wanted to ask if, in your opinion and experience, the women artists today need to address the question of difference, of being women, because now we have a lot of artists that don't talk about women issues in particular.
Mm-hmm.
They are present. So I see a shift, obvious, from the 70s up to now.
Right.
You know, there's so many. I mean, Rachel Whitehead or
Right.
other ideas. How do you think this, lives with the most direct feminist themes in the women's debate?
You'll have to restate the question for me because I'm not understanding it, and that's me. I also have hearing, so a little louder for me and in a different way.
How do you think, in your experience, the women artists today are posing other questions beside the ones specifically feminist?
Oh, well, they are. I mean, that's a statement. I think that's absolutely true. And part of what I was saying also is the question of binaries is coming up, and the notion of gender, and women and male, and there's a changing landscape.
Yes.
What the content of women's art should be, it should be the content of what is in here. But that's always true of all artists, right? I think.
I think we did a step forward by
Yes.
being allowed to say not just I'm a woman, I'm alive, I'm here, I need to be recognized. So I can address also other issues, other thinking. And I see that this is, there's a lot of artists, women artists, that don't need to say that and that live in our contemporary debate.
Right.
I think that's something that happened, that's, for the younger generation, that they sometimes need to feel women, but not being Marina Abramovich, all of them, being probably.
Well, there's one Marina Abramovich,
Yeah,
and she's very, and there's one Kathy Opie, and there's one of each of you.
I was just curious from your experience and the experience at the Brooklyn Museum, how do you promote or how do you see this, women's presence?
I'm going to throw that question to Catherine so that when she comes up here, because Catherine, as our curator, engages very actively not only with the exhibitions, but with contemporary women artists. And I think that she is in a better position to answer that with, I could sort of throw out an answer, but I think Catherine could probably address it very specifically for you. So I'll throw that to her.
So you have to stay.
She said, so you have to stay to get the answer. So I thank you very, very much. And thank you, Mary. Thank you, SACI. Thank you, NYU. It's very, very exciting that this symposium is happening. And I hope maybe it's a first annual. That would be a wonderful thing. Thank you all very much.